Just off Route 8 near Wade's Orchard lies a beautiful gem ready for travelers to stop by. Rose Window is a stained glass studio specializing in contracted work, but their studio also hosts a gallery where local artists can showcase their work in a well-lit showroom with ample natural light coming in. Immediately as you walk in, the reflected colored light brings you to an almost magical atmosphere. Shortly after being awestruck, the warm greetings of Amanda and Larry are heard. I was fortunate enough to have Larry demonstrate some impressive talent in cutting glass as I was guided back to their studio where all the work goes into creating these mesmerizing pieces. The precision shown by these weathered hands was quite the sight to see.
Most any shape, I guess this would be hard to do half. It's getting thin. Like that. So I don't know how much farther down you can go. Just depends on how lucky you are that day. And you might just take a running pliers and do it. Wow. Yeah. So I guess, if you really wanted to, you could get on down.
Amanda was kind enough to tell us a little bit about how Rose Window was started and how her family and husband ultimately influenced her to take the path of art and stained glass.
Rose Window was started in 1984, and I was a young artist that really wanted to find a way to actually make a living making art. And my dad and his mother before him were both artists. My dad, an architect and an artist, and my grandmother was a dressmaker and hat maker and an artist. And my sisters and I grew up always making things, drawing, painting, making things. And it was just a natural progression that I would like to use what I knew and be able to learn in my work. And my husband signed me up for a stained glass class, and I was okay with the idea and went and took the class and really loved it, and saw the design possibilities, and decided to open a shop. When after being mentored by the person that I first learned from and going to their studio and working on projects, and they moved away, so there was an opening in the market, and I decided to open a shop. And since then I've operated as a working artisan, and learning as I go always, and building architectural stained glass, and also painting murals and applied arts. And I named the shop Rose Window because I love the idea of the round, the circular window in a cathedral with radiating stonework or spokes holding in the stained glass. It was always situated on the gable end of a cathedral, which was the largest expanse available to the skylight, to the light from the sky, and it's called a rose window. And so that's what I named the shop. And we've been, ever since, learning and making things. We started out in Martinsville, Virginia, and we rented for 22 years a large, big, old, falling down warehouse storefront building. And when it got a little too much close to the falling down part, we had moved to Patrick County, close to Floyd, and there was we live on an old farm close by here in Woolwine, and this old building was available, and it has lots of glass, and it just seemed like a great spot for a stained glass studio. So we moved here 14 years ago. So my dad, who was very inspirational to me, he was an architect, and he went to Virginia Tech, and he met my mom at Radford, who went to Radford, and they moved to San Diego when they married. And he did his work there, designing homes for the building boom that went on in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And he spent his career in Arizona and California designing homes. And we would go with him to job sites. And I remember being impressed with just seeing the process of the ideas that he had on the work table, because my memory of my dad is sitting at a work table, always, drafting table, always, and with the ball game on and drawing, always. And then he had art supplies there that he used, and he always allowed us to play with his art supplies. And he never instructed us. He just gave us reign of his work area, and we watched him paint huge paintings in the garage. He would make sculptures out of sheet brass and copper, and he would just braze it out on the patio. I have some of those here in the shop that I keep. And he was always making things. So, you know, it was very much part of our life and my life to look at life as a big studio full of art materials. This shop that we have here, because it's right on the main drag of Route 8 and Route 40, which is the main drag here, it seemed that it needed to be a gallery rather than just a workshop. And we have all these windows, and people stop in and often ask for directions. And so we have a lot of friends and family that have just kind of fallen into place here. And I welcome people that have a mindset of the common thread of the work here in the shop is nature. Because most people that live in this area, that's why they're here. It's the mountains and nature. So that's the common thread of the work here in the shop. There are several other artists here that work in glass, and some not stained glass, but other ways of using glass. And probably the most popular right now is fused glass, which is warm glass in the kiln using special glass that is melted together in the kiln and then sometimes slumped to form objects or artwork. And glass blowing is another field that people can explore. We don't do that here. It requires a lot of special equipment that we don't have. Glass painting I use a lot in my work, and it's seen in this area mainly in church windows, and it's fired in the kiln, and the glass is permanent because it's made out of the same materials that glass is made out of. So once it's fired, it's permanently on the glass. And one of the most interesting things that people learn when they first look into learning about stained glass, and many people think, because it's almost a misnomer that it's called stained glass, and people think that we, the glass artists, actually stain the colors into the glass or dye it in some way, or that we could take their glass in their door and stain it to make stained glass. And actually, the glass is colored in the manufacturing process. And so we buy sheets of the glass and then cut it by hand to fit a template and then put it together. And so the glass is colored with minerals from the earth to get different colors. For example, cobalt for blue, maybe copper for green, selenium for yellow, a bright pink, dark pink uses gold, and we call that gold pink, and it's more expensive. And so the glass is permanently colored. And you can actually go to glass factories. There are some nearby in West Virginia, and you can watch the glass being made. And it's molten, actually ladled out on molten glass, different batches that are kind of stirred together and then rolled flat. Or they can be blown on a tube and then cut flat. And then they have to be annealed, carefully cooled, so that they're stable. And then it's permanently colored. And the difference between using stained glass and then the painted glass that you'll often see in church windows, usually the painted glass starts out as plain clear glass, and then it's fired with glass enamels and glass paint that is, as I said, that's made out of different chemicals or minerals that's found in the glass, and it has a pigment in it we have to grind it by hand. It's very medieval in its application. It's done the same way that it was done in the Middle Ages. We grind it with a glass mortar and pestle, and then we apply it in different firings. And then it could be just the tracing, the line that you see, the black line delineating a figure, for example. Then it's shaded with a beester brown color, and then it's colored with enamel, glass enamel, stainers colors, and fired in the kiln. But that is usually done on clear glass. And next time you go to a church that has some figurative work, you could probably go up to it and look at it and notice the difference between the colored glass and the painted glass. So the application of stained glass, a lot of people think of it as church windows or windows for places of worship, and that was the beginning of the use of stained glass. And over the years, of course, it's become a decorative element and an architectural element in homes and places of business, as well as churches. And we, in our studio, we work with a lot of homeowners and builders and designers that appreciate the addition of adding stained glass to a building or a room. And it could be installed in a building permanently, or it can be free hanging like a piece of art hanging in a window. And we often do entryways. That's probably the most appreciated place you can put it in your home, because it's noticed every day as you enter and exit, and it's noticed from the outside. And it's very, just adds a lot to the beauty and the enjoyment of just coming in and going out of your house. So being primarily a commission studio where people will request certain projects, and they can range from small items that maybe are a gift for somebody up to large, multiple windows in a building. The process usually starts with the request, and then conversations with the client about what they're envisioning and what the intended purpose is, and what is the idea behind what they'd like. And then sometimes people have a very firm idea of what they'd like. Often they have emails they'll send me of things they've seen online or photographs they've seen. And sometimes they don't have an idea, they just have a need. Like maybe they've removed an air conditioning unit and they have a hole in their wall and they need to fill it with something. And so I'll just kind of walk with them through the steps of coming up with a concept. And we have portfolios of ideas of things we've done and different design books. Sometimes people bring in sketches that they've done or their kids have done, and they want that created in glass. So it's a lot of variety in the requests that we get. And once we decide on an idea, I usually start with small thumbnail sketches, and people look through them until we kind of come up with one that's we all like. It's a very collaborative process. And then once we come up with a line drawing, because we think in terms of line drawing in stained glass, because the lead lines will determine the actual design, and the pattern that we use, which is drawn full scale on paper, that's the next step, and that's called a cartoon. And being that it's just lines separating the separate colors of glass, we call it a cartoon. And once we come up with that drawing, the client can select glass from what we have in stock or what we can order. There are hundreds of types of glass that they can choose from. And we view them in the sunlight so they can see how they play together. Or if it's going to be an application where it's not going to have strong sunlight through it, we'll view it in that appropriate light. Then once the glass is selected and the cartoon is drawn, then I draw out a full-scale design, making 2 copies, and it's all old school: pen, paper, rulers, carbon paper, make a copy, and one stays whole as a working outline or a working cartoon. The other one we cut up into templates for actual glass cutting. And we have to allow for the metal that would go between the pieces of glass as we're cutting out the template. Then we have paper template, and we begin cutting the glass by hand using handheld hand tools, pliers, and glass cutter, which has a small honed steel wheel on it that doesn't cut the glass but scores the glass, making a mark on the glass that creates a weakness. And then using special pliers or applying pressure with our hands or with a table, different methods for applying pressure to that score, and then hopefully the glass will comply and break along the desired line. Then once we have all the glass cut out and numbered, we number it as we go so we can eliminate a jigsaw puzzle. Then we grind the edges with a diamond bit glass grinder, and then the metal is applied, either lead strips or what we call the copper foil method, which is wrapping each piece with thin copper and then soldering over all the copper. And the solder would never stick to glass, so it will stick to the copper. After it's soldered together, the lead or soldered copper foil becomes a framework for the panel, and we turn it over. We have to do the same soldering technique on the back side, and then it's basically constructed. And then the finishing steps are for the lead pieces. The lead has grooves that the glass has slipped into. Then we have to put a weatherproofing putty that we put all over the window. It's a very messy process. We putty the window and then clean it off, and that rigidizes the lead and also makes it weatherproof. In the case of the copper foiled window, we have to clean all the flux that was used in the soldering process, and then we can apply a patina, which changes the color of the solder, if desired, to a copper or a dark color, and then we clean very thoroughly the windows. And then it's ready for installation. In the case of a window that's permanently installed, it will be installed in the building, either with usually wood molding, or in a steel frame, depending on the application. And if it's going to be a free hanging piece, we solder some kind of hanging apparatus onto the panel for it to be hung. And so this is a variation of a ginkgo leaf design that's very prevalent in arts and crafts style architecture. And this is one that you can see the copper foiled sections, which is this section with the tree, and it's the lines are wrapped in copper and then soldered. So the copper has been covered with solder, and then I applied a dark patina. In this case, it's almost like an oil rub bronze, and it blends very well with the lead. And you can see in this piece, the lead is straighter and more uniform and wider. And so it was a design choice to have the contrast in this case. Sometimes it's a structural choice, but in this case, I just like the contrast of the regular appearance of the lead contrasted with the organic lines of the copper foil. And then the lead has turned dark because it's already been puttied. All up under these flanges is the weatherproofing putty, and it's made the panel quite sturdy and weatherproofed. So these are examples of fused glass jewelry, and they are lots of pieces of glass that have been cut and stacked and fired in the kiln. Most of these pieces are multiple firings, and these pieces are interesting in that the glass used has a metallic finish on it. It's called dichroic glass, and it refracts and bends light so that the colors change in the light. And here we have one that's very, as the light hits it, the colors will change. And it's a fun type of glass to use for jewelry. On pieces like this that are made in the kiln, well, the glass fuses right around approximately 1500 degrees in the kiln. And you use temperature and kiln time to achieve different effects. But some of these pieces are only one firing, and then some of them are multiple firings. And so once they're fired, then they must be annealed for a very slow process so that the glass will not crack. And so it could be a few days of separate firings for some of these pieces that have multiple layers. And then once they're fused, they're often polished, cut and then polished and then fired again to get a finished edge, depending on the effect the artist is going for.